Welcome everybody to Wednesday Live, and goodness, what a difference a week makes. And I'm tempted to quote the opening line from Dickens' Tale of Two Cities, but we're artists, so we forget the weasel and we go to the easel. And this week I wanted to start a series on trees, because they're just these wonderful things that we enjoy them. They give us shade, they give us heat, they give us building material, they give us beauty, and they're just such a wonderful subject. So I thought I would begin with something that was pretty much the basic approach to watercolor. In this situation, we have, this is Crapo Park in Burlington. It's an old, some sort of juniper or cedar or some sort of tree like that. There appears to be one that has gone on in the background, but this one in the front that has been very weathered. But I don't know what, there's many beautiful trees in that park. Why I was attracted to this one, I don't know. That's just how we are. Hi, Kathy. So this would be the classic situation in watercolor where we have dark things superimposed on a light background. You can see how the foreground tree is kind of silhouetted. There's, I don't know, maybe this reminded me of chess pieces or something. We have the white pieces and the dark pieces, and they're moving on a chessboard maybe. But what I did, I put it into black and white so that we could look at it. So what you see here is things begin to get kind of confused. There's a lot of texture up here, a lot of texture down here in the darks. They're just sort of splattered all over the place. And in order to render this texture of this foreground foliage in this closest tree against the foliage in the background, we need to make it a little more separated, possibly, would be the thing to say. Yes, I've drawn it already. Hi, Becky. You guys, I know you all can draw, and I will review what the basics were and what are the things to do. But I want to show how I'm going to remedy this situation of, it's kind of a splatter of darks and grays and lights. And I want to feature a larger pattern. So I duplicated it, and then we'll go into doing this. So what I'm going to do is I want to feature that, and I want to feature this, and I want to kind of separate it so that it doesn't come up too splattered. So what I'm going to do is I am going to consolidate the dark pattern in the shade under the trees at back. And I'm going to cast shadows. I'm going to strengthen a bit. So that we get a larger pattern which we can see, and will help us separate the foreground, middle ground, background. Now we still have a situation here where this merges with that. But what I want to do is I want to separate those things with color. And let's just strengthen these shadow patterns. You can see how this sort of consolidates things in a more, I always think of like Robert Motherwell or Franz Klein, the abstract expressionists who, weren't quite as famous as Jackson Pollock, but who, in my opinion, it's not an opinion, it's just a preference. I find their work a little more interesting and a little more useful to a representational painter like me. So hopefully you can see the difference between this and this. It's a little more organized. It's a little easier to see. Maybe even, let's go back and mark up. Let's even consolidate some of these areas. The foliage from the foreground, cedar, juniper, whatever the thing is. I'm sure there's one of you can tell me what this actually is. But if you live in the southeast Iowa area or Burlington area, Crapo Park, you probably know it's definitely worth visiting. It's a wonderful, wonderful place. A lot of paintable stuff there with views of the Mississippi to boot. So there's that. Now, let's talk about what I did with regards to this. So hopefully you can see a little stronger pattern to help feature this. We're going to use color to deconfuse that area and this area. But let's talk about the drawing. Put that away. We have these shapes that are sort of V's or Y's. What we don't want to do is draw a Y like that. We want to draw something more like a lowercase y. And we don't want things onto the left and right to be the same. We want some difference from one side to the other. So if this is leaning this much, leaning more, I like that. Straight, leaning. Another thing to look out for when you're drawing trees, make sure that as they go into the background, that the bases are in different places. So the closer ones are here, the mid-distance ones are here, and the far distance ones are here. So another thing that I'll do is I'll try to make sure that the intervals are interesting. This is a wide interval, this is a short interval. That's a shorter still interval, that's a shorter still interval. You might have some of these secondary branches that come off of the trunk. Make sure that they are not coming out like that. You want one to come out here and one to come out there, and then a little closer to it here, and then a little closer to it there. So, excuse me, as it's a whirl as it grows up the tree. There will be a difference in this distance, that distance, and each one will get smaller, and they will be staggered. Sometimes you need to do that just to make it interesting. Another thing I'll do when I draw on the trees, I will concentrate on the joint. Those of you who are of an age like me, you know it's not your leg, it's your hip and your knees, right? So the joint is the thing. There's a oddball thing going on behind here. I've sort of drawn that. The other thing is that just like any image that I've ever worked with, I'm looking for a key horizontal and a key vertical. We have a pair of key verticals here, even though they're not exactly vertical. This one's pretty vertical, but this is a bit of a lean, but it's the foreground. But here, that halfway mark, the horizon line there, is pretty level. I have pitched it just a, it's not, I don't have it level. I have it just a little bit like that, and I think that will help. So let's get into some color. Now, as always, we're going to work light to dark. So obviously this is the lightest color. The open areas here where the light is penetrating through the foliage is the next lightest area. So I'm not going to make this perfectly white. I see a little bit of pinkishness in it. So I might just get the tiniest bit of alizarin and a lot of water and just come in there like that. The lovely thing about trees is that, or tree subjects, is we don't have to be hyper precise like we would with, say, architecture or something like that. Now we've got some yellowish, greenish, ochreish colors coming in through here. So there was some green left over on my palette. I might put a little bit of yellow in it, and a fair amount of water. It's a very runny mix of paint. I'm just going to get in here like that. It goes down to here. And it just occurred to me, but doggone it, I should have gotten my hairdryer and plug that in. So I may have to run upstairs quickly. Now notice here, this some of that light color is coming through there in the dappled shade. And then it goes to a sort of a lavender color. So what I'm going to do, just to make that come forward a bit, I'm going to put some yellow ochre into the runny yellow so that it is not the same as what I've just used. And I'll go over these bits that are darker. That's no problem, because they're going to be darker. Actually, there's some of that dappled light hitting those trunks, isn't there? So down here, it's getting sort of bluish violet. I'm going to get some of my lavender, Holbein lavender. And again, I'm doing the very lightest bits of these areas. And that looks dark now. I know it looks dark now. Boy, there's a word for today. It looks dark now. While we're waiting for this to do its thing, let's go to the upper areas up here. Now, what I'm going to do in order to make these dark patterns, stand out, is I'm going to put a medium rich green in here to separate it. Maybe not as dark as this shadow, but not as dark as these. So what I want to do is I want to mix up, say, I'll just take that mix I was using down here. It looks blurry, but it's a lot of texture down there. We don't mind it. Why don't we even put a little bit of runny sienna in here and let it bleed around. And boy, yes, it's going to be a holy mess for the time being, but we don't look at what's going on now. We look at where we're going, what we have in mind, and where we're headed. Now, into that runny yellow ochre mix, I'm going to get some Prussian blue, and I'm going to make a sort of a little more yellow ochre. This is less runny than what we've been using. It's more pigment. Maybe I'll even put some turquoise in there or some cerulean. I want it to be slightly cooler because I might want to go for a richer, darker green up here. So what I want to avoid at this point, all this is darker. That I don't worry about. This, that light tree, the one that's going to be with its tree maker. Let's not keep that the same. Let's modify it as we go. Put a little yellow in, a little more yellow in. Just try not to get into those lovely branches. Up in here, I don't have to worry because it's all that stuff is darker. I might put a little bit of turquoise into the mix to, if you change these colors wherever they're at, they will have the tendency to look like different places or different spaces or different levels of illumination. So it's a little lighter back there, but not by much. Let's get some Prussian into it. Whoa, not that. Oh gosh, I've overdone it. Well, let's put some yellow in to change it up. Some yellow ochre, some cad yellow, holy mess stage. Artists learn to excel at dealing with the holy mess stage. It's a life skill because life hands us holy messes. Now this I can hit. That tree back there is much darker. So I'm going to make a yellower mix because it's very bright back there because it's far away. I'm going to go through that. I could hit those, it's darker, but that's, who knows. Maybe it'd just be nicer if I don't. Save myself a little work. Starting to get some stuff. Oh, look at this mess going on down here. We're going to work with that. Looks like a blossom in a terrible mess, but we're going to use it. Hi, Mickey. The Des Moines crowd is weighing in. That's starting to dry up. I might be able to take this, modify it with, say, some ultramarine or some Prussian, get it a little darker. Maybe a little richer by getting into the Nicolazzo yellow. That's that brandy green yellow or brandy brownish amber yellow. I'm going to put some of those shadows in, these cast shadows. We don't have to put them in exactly where they are. We can put them in where we like them. Well, that's a trunk back there, so it doesn't matter. All of this happens in there, doesn't it? Now, as I get to the base of these or not base, these shadows here, as I get to where they're closer to us in the foreground, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a little bit more Prussian blue to change the character of the color so that, oh, look at this. Deep and rich, and yeah. I want it, let's even throw some of it on there. Let's get some red into that. Why red? Because we were talking about we're going to move into some lavender type shades of color. So I'm going to splatter. Best brush I own, my fingers. Just as long as it looks interesting. Rinsing that brush, blotting that brush. I'm going to get right into that lavender and I'm going to start plowing that into here. And because the surface is wet, those colors are going to mingle. And what I put down originally, wet the surface. So this paint, which I'm sticking right into the paint, it's creamy and it's a lot of pigment in it. So when I stick it in here, it doesn't go too far. It's about the same consistency as what's there. I'm mindful of the fact that there is, maybe I'll put a bit back here, there is some water here. So I need to bring in not runny paint, but paint with more pigment in it. So let's even get some red into this in this general vicinity. There's some red violet in here. Hello, Lisa. I want to capitalize on the red-violet character of some of these spots. More red. Could be alizarin, could be cad. I'm using both. And some Prussian. This is slow-moving paint. You can see that. And again, I have to apologize. We're still downstairs in the living room. The flies are still crazy bad upstairs. And I'm hoping if we ever get a good freeze, I'll be done with them. Boo for monoculture. So a little bit of that there. So a little bit of this happening back here, that tree. Some of that in there. It's very dark in there, isn't it? A little bit in here. Now that surface is still wet. See how that's bleeding in? I hope you can see that we're beginning to get something that looks like what we're after. I hope. So I'm going to get a bit of that I've been using. Maybe I'll put a little bit more red in it and a little bit more Prussian blue. And to get this texture here into this moist surface, I'm going to splatter some paint and it's going to disappear somewhat. It'll stay kind of where I put it. Shoot, I could put it up here because we got all this lovely texture. And in a couple places, I may want to actually paint it in if I want a bigger mark. There's a difference between a painted mark and a ad hoc mark that occurs on its own. This I think I want to dry a bit more. But I'm looking at this and I'm thinking about where could I work and not create a blossom. It's sort of a little bit dry up here. Not quite ready for, well, when I put in darks, that's very dry, that's very dry. This is where you stop and you think, and okay, where am I? What can I do? Down here, there are some ochre, lavender colors. I'm going to get the brush that is about the same size but holds less paint. So I'm going for the Oriental now rather than the mop. This will be a good time to explain the equipment I'm using and the 140-pound Saunders cold press. The board is at about a 45-degree angle. I've got it taped to the edge and across the edge so that you can get the brush under the tape. And what that does is it only holds it at the four corners and allows a bit more of the shrink and swell as we get the paper wet. Whereas if you had taped across the edge and held it down all along its border, the painting would tend to belly out. And some people don't mind that. Some people have trouble with it. I'm kind of in between. I'm looking at this and I'm seeing there's a little bit more yellowishness in here, so I am going to mix some runny-ish yellow, cad yellow, which is, cad yellow tends to get dirty on the palette and turn green. So I'm just putting that in there. Maybe I will even smuggle in some creamy cad yellow into here while this surface is moist. Now what happens is when I put that wet cad yellow in there, there's still a little moisture on the surface and it pushes the darker greener color out of the way, and then we get this color, which is a sort of intermediate yellow-green. I think I would like to take a little bit of that, a bit more so slow-ish moving paint, I suppose we would say, and I just want to, I'm not using a big palette of colors. I've got two reds, the quinacridone rose, alizarin crimson substitute type color, the cad red light, cad red naphthol red, a tomato type red. I've got a yellow ochre and a cad yellow light. I've got ultramarine blue, cobalt blue, cerulean blue, turquoise blue, and Prussian blue. And neutral tint. I haven't used neutral tint, probably won't. Well, maybe I will. Burnt sienna. That is burnt sienna. It's not the oxide red. What else? The Holbein lavender and the Nicolazo yellow. Cadmium orange. Probably won't use the cad orange. While we're up here, I think I want to start doing the darks of that pattern because we're basically with there. So this is going to be a dark. This is going to be a strong dark. It's going to be at least as dark as some of the stuff that's going on down here. So what's my darkest blue? Prussian blue. Stiff mix of that. Now, straight up blue is not going to be the thing. So I'm going to put some of the Nicolazo yellow into it to turn it into a rich sort of green. Then I'm going to look at this mess and I'm going to say, where's that pattern appearing? And I'm going to say, oh, I've got an area in here, an area in there. Using the side of the brush, I'm going to make a broken pattern if I can. Again, this is one of those things where we don't have to do exactly what's there. We can put it where we think it would be good to have it. There's a branch coming down here, and I very often will with trees for fine branches and even well into the trunks. Where the areas where the shade is predominating, I will put that color on the trunk, not try to paint it a separate color. Now, being mindful, I'm looking out for trying to avoid getting shapes that I'm making now that look geometric or straight. I want them to all be very organic and irregular. So that might involve putting a little water in it and splattering. And then working off of that, using the little splatters for the small leaves, or it is an evergreen, isn't it? So I don't want it to be a dark pattern like all the same color. I want some variation in it. So I'm going to get a little bit down here, coming across there, and then I'm going to look at what I've created and I see, where do I need to, oh, right over here. I need to get a shape going. Shape over here. Again, I don't have to do exactly what's there. I can put it however I think it needs to be. This looks a little bit too geometric. I'm going to start putting some burnt sienna into this mix. Going to slow moving paint. This is, or not moving paint. Look at that. So there's some trunks, or not trunks, there are little limbs or branches coming out. Look for the character of them, where they appear. Start them at the trunk and work them out to their ends. Don't start at their ends and work into the trunk. Now, because I'm starting to put some brown in here, the burnt sienna, I'm going to begin working into my trunk. More burnt sienna into that green mix. A little bit of water. I want to get runnier. I don't know if you can see here, it starts dark brown and it gets lighter brown as it comes down the trunk. So let's rinse and get a bit more sienna, burnt sienna. Where can I put that? How about up here? Maybe throw a little red into it. Why red? Because there's a lot of green in this picture and red is the complement, and we want some relief. Bring that out here. Let's start that over here too. Now this will not be the last color I put on this trunk either. There is a variety of, because there's dappled shadows and light on these trunks. So I might get some burnt sienna, put a little more red in it, maybe put a little lavender in it. to get a neutral, weird brown. Rinse. I might go to actually a bit of yellow ochre. Back to the neutral brownish tone with the burnt sienna and the lavender. There is a place where it looks like someone has, let's get more lavender, chainsawed off, or the thing broke from a storm, who knows. Trees, they endure so much. So I'm skipping that area there. Maybe I'll even put a little orange in there, orange and yellow ochre. There's some, yeah, that's very cedarish looking. Down here, it's very blue-gray. I'm going to get a lot more of the lavender. Like I say, this is not the last color that we're going to be putting in there. We're going to be putting some interesting darks, shapes in there as we go. Maybe a little bit on the right side, of this. And then back to the burnt sienna on this side. Now, touching like into like, in other words, the consistency of what I'm putting on there now is similar to the consistency of what's there. So it blends, it melts. Back here there are a couple of trees. I'm going to suggest them. Behind the light white one, there's a pair that are back here. Let them disappear into the canopy of the foliage. All right, so far nothing is too far out of line. Get a little bit of clean yellow ochre. Where can I do that? I'm going to put it about there. Well, I'm going to get a little bit of the red, the alizarin. I need a pink, a ochre pink with a fair amount of water. I need some variegation in the trunk of this tree that is gone on to wherever trees go. Now, this area in here, remember I consolidated that area with a stronger dark to try and make a stronger pattern. I'm going to start doing that now and possibly come in here as well. And by putting these darks in, I'm hoping to frame this tree and that tree. So the task here is to make these trees stand out, although they're kind of back in there. So Prussian into some yellow ochre to get a deep, rich, not yellow ochre, it was a cad yellow. I want a deep, rich green. I could maybe get a little bit of this. So there's a fair amount of it in here. These are strong darks. There's some lovely little sapling things that come up there. One of the very important things when you paint trunks of trees or branches, the spacing of them needs to be such that they're not disco beat, dun, 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 or techno or whatever. You want a little bit here, you know, a wide space and narrow space, a wide space, a narrow space. There's nothing much happening here, and then we come to this thing. Now I'm looking at that and I'm saying I don't want it to be quite as dark, so I'm getting some of this more yellowish stuff, and I'm going to come in on the top here and meet the darker blue-green. So the foreground trees are starting to stand out a little more now. I hope you can see. And these two lighter trees we're going to find by virtue of putting the space between them and beside them. And it's dark down there. A little bit in that, a bit of that. Maybe we will just, oh, there's some lovely little branches. Let's get into that brownish greenish mix again. Some lovely little branches coming down from here. If you don't have an oriental brush like this, get a nylon brush that has a point like so. And yeah, okay. I want to, where can I work? Okay, I think I can work here. No, it's still a little wet. All right, down here, still wet. Yeah, still wet. Where can we work? Where can we work? I think there, but since it feels a little bit cool to the touch, meaning that there's some water there, we have to bring in paint that is very, lot of pigment, very little water. So, Prussian. Oh, let's get some, we haven't mixed Prussian with burnt sienna yet. Painting that tree back there. One of the things that I will try to do when I paint trees is work from the trunk up to the branches and then out to the twigs. There's a tendency when we paint to want to start out at the ends of the twigs and work our way back to the trunks. So I'm down here now, and I'm just looking at the shapes. They're abstract shapes, very easy to paint. The left side of this tree is quite dark. Prussian blue, burnt sienna, in varying proportions. There's that joint. It's important to get the joint. I'm going to put some red on the leading edge of this. Rinse it, blot it. In other words, get the water out of the brush so that I'm not bringing new water to the, and on that surface which is damp, it's going to mingle. Now I'm going to put that into this grayish greenish mix for a slow moving nondescript brown. And when those two areas meet, they're going to merge just a little bit. Back to the stiffer mix. In other words, by stiff, I mean more pigment, less water. We're going to be in here, where there have been some cutting over here, underneath there. Now we're going to address the deeply shadowed side of the left side of this trunk here. Now I'm going to put some water with this mix. Maybe I'll put some alizarin in it to get a pinkish sort of color. And maybe even some ultra. I want a purplish color. What I want is, I'm going to try and suggest the dappled light and shadow on this trunk. Same on this. There's some cast shadows across the very light surface of this tree, which has gone on. And shadows. Okay, where are we now? Where are we now? Still need to make some of these areas this probably this one, I think maybe you're talking about, Cousin Dennis. Oh yeah, it does look overexposed on the so yeah, it's hopefully one of the things about looking from one device to another, going from a photograph to a device to another device, some of the values will change, and not always for the better. And I am hoping to make what looks right for a painting right here. So I want a little more small bits of forest floor stuff. I don't know if it would be appropriate in a tree series or context, but one thing that would be very interesting is the Crapo Park here it's on a bluff above the Mississippi. And down on the Mississippi, there's all kind of trees that just float down the river that fell off into it and became driftwood over time and bleached out, and they're just amazing looking. I know an artist who makes sculptures out of them. Might be fun to paint those, because I'm going to try to put a little bit more finesse on these, the greenery from these things. The idea here is that the closer thing is going to be the more contrasty, distinct mark, whereas the stuff that's farther away is going to be a little less contrasty. and a little bit more indistinct. So try to frame the foreground a little better. This area in here needs a bit of work, I think. Well, I can see right away that actually we need a little more yellow in here. So I'm glazing that. Oop, not there. Not there, John. Oh, golly. Well, rinse. Blot. Take it out. I think I want to smuggle in a little bit of some turquoise or some sort of blue to tame these areas a bit. Not both sides of the painting. That's the sort of thing I want to do on one side but not the other. And that sort of asymmetry is very effective at making a space look volumetric. And for lack of a better term, natural looking. And I do not know why that is. So at this point, let us detape it and see if that tells us anything. Sometimes when you can see the border of it, things will become apparent. Well, I can see that in the foreground, juniper slash cedar slash whatever it is. I think I want to have a little more painted texture rather than just... I'm going to get some brownish sauce. Hi, Brent. Oh, it's still wet there. Some very thin lines that are characteristic of that bark on those particular kinds of trees. This is going to have to be very stiff mix of paint, so I'm going to mostly brown, a little bit of ultramarine blue. I won't do it so much back here. I definitely won't do it back there. I want to keep any kind of detail like this happening close to me so that it doesn't, we don't confuse the foreground with the background. A lot of times people will trip up on that. They'll look back here and your eye will adjust for the distance and the illumination and you'll see all manner of detail. But the second you look here, and that's in your peripheral vision, then you will not see the detail here, but you will see the detail there. And for painting, we need to keep the detail where we want to keep the viewer looking, which is usually the foreground or the middle distance, or wherever it happens to be that we are calling it a focal point. And too many things going on in the background that are of equal level of rendering to the foreground is just going to confuse the viewer and they don't quite know where to look. Now there are some beautiful green little things that are starting to pop up down here. I suppose that's the sort of thing you could have masked out or, put a piece of tape there or something. Oh, you're very welcome, Kathy. I think I might leave it at this stage and make any, well, let me see something I could do. I want to put some pale blue-gray shadows or cast shadows on the tree that's going on. And perhaps a little bit more strong dark in there. For those hollow bits where the little critters hang out. Okay, so that is basically what I wanted to address here. The idea being that we want to have a distinct foreground, middle ground, background. And one of the ways we can do that is frame a light or a dark with something that contrasts. Frame a light thing with darks, frame a dark thing with lights. Usually you're going to get a little bit of both. Try to create a big pattern where there's maybe too much texture in the middle distance or the background so that you can save that extreme texture for the foreground. So I might even just strengthen this to pull it forward a bit more. And maybe explain why there's so much shade down here. We could, if we wanted, we could maybe later when it's dry, lift out some spots there. Oh, thank you, Mary Helen. Now, coming up, what I'd like to maybe try, some things like this. Very tangly fall type situations. How to address those kinds of things. Trees that get a little bit of illumination this time of year in the woods in the morning where the light comes through, how we might address something like that. These kinds of things. That can get very busy, but it can be very interesting. So, thank you all for tuning in. These are the days when we want to be painters and doing as much of this as we possibly can to keep ourselves sane. So I want to thank you all for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed that. And bye-bye.